Morning. Are we on? Hi, morning, everyone. Sorry, little thing there, had a bit of a glitch. So I thought we'd talk about David Frost today. May is the month that keeps giving. We have had the local elections, and now we've got two loony conventions in town. So we had the Boris Johnson personality cult meeting. They had their first group therapy session on Saturday. And now we've got the National Conservatism Conference. I can't remember if it's a conference or a convention. Either way, the second group therapy session, but this time not for Boris Johnson fans, but fans for right-wing fascism, as if there's any other kind. But I thought I'd talk about one of the speakers who's supposed to be on today, who is David Frost, because David Frost, who, remember, is the man who negotiated the Brexit deal, then said the Brexit deal was a load of rubbish, then said that he is the person you should still be listening to. He wants to be prime minister now. He's announced that he's going to stand for parliament at the next election, or he wants to stand for parliament at the next election. This would, of course, mean giving up his seat in the House of Lords. No doubt he will attempt to draw parallels with Winston Churchill, who did the same, although it was a very different system then. But he had to give up his seat in the House of Lords, or in his case, an inherited seat, to be able to stand for Parliament. And the thing is, though, in Frost's case, he's not actually sacrificing anything. Like, he seems to be suggesting, for a start, he'll only stand in a safe seat. In other words, he doesn't want to mess about with any of that foot slogging or campaigning. He doesn't think he's actually popular enough to win a tough election. So he wants a safe seat. He wants a seat where people will reliably go out and vote for a goat if they've got a blue rosette on them, except there's something a little bit odd. I saw in The Guardian, there's a suggestion. Obviously, no seat's been arranged for him yet. There is a suggestion that he would be given mid-Derbyshire as a seat. Now, if you look at first of all, this is one of the seats that's been gerrymandered. So it's already a very safe seat, and it's going to be made a safer seat if you look at past results. But if you look at current polling, it actually looks like Labour would be the more likely. If there was to be a general election soon, unless something changes in the polling for this particular part of Derbyshire, it looks like actually Labour would take it. Now, I have seen, because electoral calculus have now updated some of their stuff with the new boundary changes, it remains to be seen how accurate that is, and we can't find that out until after the election. But it suggests that although it's not in as bad a position, it would still be Labour who are most likely to win it. So if David Frost is given mid-Derbyshire and he accepts it thinking it's a safe seat, I don't think it's that safe. It may well be that it's not exactly one of Labour's main target seats. It may be that Labour don't pump all their resources into it, but you would still think the Conservatives, because it's at all iffy, you would think they'd want a strong candidate for it. And all I will say is, if the Conservatives actually think David Frost is a strong campaigner, I think they're in a great deal of trouble. He is a bumbling idiot. He really is. He's managed to grift a living in recent years by getting on the Brexit train very early on. But he is, as we should have seen from his negotiations, completely incompetent. But he could also just be jumping a sinking ship. Because remember, although we'll say, you know, he's sacrificing a position in the House of Lords to stand as an MP, that's not really much of a sacrifice, apart from the fact that as an MP, you get paid more than as a member of the House of Lords. Also, he'll be expecting to find himself a senior member of the shadow cabinet, which carries with it an extra pay as well. So he'll get more money, plus he'll be more relevant. Plus the House of Lords has been abolished anyway. So the pay for Lords is going to go down to zero. Absolutely zero. Am I broadcasting during an earthquake? No, I may be just knocking my camera, though. It's on my monitor. So, yeah, before I go on to, let's just catch up with a few comments on this, because I've got a few other things to to say about this. Can't wait to see him get nothing. Well, I'm not sure if that's relevance too. David Frost, a prime example of delusions of grandeur. Well, David Frost, interestingly, has been described by people who know him as a nobody who became a somebody and really enjoyed it. You know, so he really likes the attention. Now, at the moment, he gets plenty of attention. He writes pieces. I think he's written another piece for the Daily Telegraph today. I haven't read that yet. But he writes pieces for the Daily Telegraph. You know, he's also the darling of the likes of the Daily Mail and the Daily Express. And he will be getting paid a lot of money to write those articles. Bear in mind, Boris Johnson was paid, I think, something like £250,000 a year to write one article a week for the Telegraph. And that was years ago. So you imagine, you know, inflation, all the rest of it, how much David Frost would be getting paid. He's not writing one a week. I don't think he is anyway. I don't really read the Telegraph that much. But for writing articles now and then, he will be getting a tidy little sum for that. I don't know whether they're getting what the arrangement is to speak at this Looney convention. The second one started yesterday, but it's on again today. Presumably they need 2 days because they've got more loonies who need to say something than the Boris Johnson personality cult. This is the one that Sweller Braverman and Jacob Rees-Mogg spoke at yesterday. I need to catch up, but I don't think Frost spoke yesterday. I think he's on today. So I'll need to check that one out as well. But I don't know whether they get paid for that as well or whether they're just volunteering their time. But he's getting money for writing articles for the press at the very least. But I see this as him wanting to remain relevant because although he might be getting enough money at the moment, you think the Conservatives are sort of going to tilt when they're in opposition. It's going to be a little bit different. The House of Lords is getting abolished. David Frost may find that he's no longer this great voice for the right wing that's supported by the billionaire press. So he may decide that what he needs to do is to enter Parliament, become a senior member of the the shadow cabinet, because he'll be on the opposition. It'd be quite funny. I wonder if he'll even stand to be leader of the Conservative Party. Can you imagine that? In theory, if he be, I don't think there's anything against Tory rules about this. I think all you need to be is an MP, a Tory MP. So if he does get a safe, and he'll need a safe seat to win it, I would think, he'll presumably also be making sure there's no one planning on standing in a dolphin suit. And if he becomes an MP, Rishi Sunak, of course, will stand down after they lose the election. I wonder if he'll stand to be leader, or will he bide his time? Will he instead try and back the right horse? Because he's influential at the moment, or so you would believe anyway, from the popular press, the Tory press. So his support could count for something. So as long as he backs the right horse, gets himself a senior position in cabinet, or the shadow cabinet, I keep saying cabinet because they're in cabinet, in shadow cabinet, and then waits for Sweller Braverman or Kemi Badenoch, whoever wins that contest, to fail. And then maybe his plan is, right, well, the Conservatives aren't going to win the next election, so I will back someone who I think will win. They will give me a senior position. I maintain my high profile, even extend it. A few years down the line, they lose another election. They have to stand down. Then I will stand for leader. And then maybe that by that time, people are starting to get a bit complacent, ready to vote for the Conservatives again. And I will become the leader. And therefore, I will become Prime Minister. Although in reality, it will be back to the days of Ian Duncan Smith, I suspect. Because David Frost, I don't think he's a particularly stupid man, but I don't think he's canny, if you know what I mean. I strongly suspect that, see, there were stories like PMQs is supposed to be a problem for the Prime Minister. Opposition MPs are putting the Prime Minister's scrutiny. They get to choose the questions. The other MPs get to choose the questions, and opposition MPs, particularly the leader of the opposition, is going to choose questions that are designed to put the Prime Minister on the spot, designed to highlight any perceived failings, right? So when Ian Duncan Smith was leader of the opposition, he was the one who used to be scared of PMQs. He was the one who used to get very anxious because he was always the one who was stitched up by Tony Blair. And you think The same thing will happen with David Frost. He will be totally ineffective in PMQs. He will be the one being made to look absolutely ridiculous. But there we go. Choose Jacob Rees-Mogg as their next leader. It'd be so funny. He has tried before, of course, hasn't he? It is actually quite funny at the moment because so thinking about the next Conservative leader. So the process, we know the process now. They've been through enough Tory leaders for us to know the process. The process is one of two things. Either Tory MPs get behind one candidate and they say, this is our pick. There's no need to ask the members. This is our candidate. They did that with Theresa May. They did it with Rishi Sunak, right? The other way is to have a normal leadership contest, lots of contestants, whittle it down to 2, and then send that choice of 2 to the party membership and the party members vote. Now, here is what I would, and that has happened with Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. Now, here is what I would suggest. If you look at the 4 Tory leaders who have been chosen while they've been in power, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss by the membership, Rishi Sunak and Theresa May by Tory MPs uniting behind one candidate, right? I would argue that when Tory MPs united behind a single candidate, they tried to choose pragmatism. They didn't always choose the best leader, but they chose pragmatism. Theresa May and Rishi Sunak were the pragmatic choices. When it went to the membership, look what happened. Boris Johnson was up against Jeremy Hunt, right? Jeremy Hunt was the pragmatic choice. Boris Johnson was the, I can deliver you all the upsides and no downsides. Who did the party membership choose? Boris Johnson. Then, when it was between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak was the pragmatic choice. He was the one saying, no, you can't have everything. There are trade-offs with decisions. Liz Truss was the one saying, no, there are no trade-offs. I can bring you everything. I can bring you golden streets and low taxes, high growth, all the rest of it. Who did they pick? Liz Truss. So if at the next leadership contest, the Tory MPs cannot unite behind a single candidate, and they won't because the far right of the party will presumably still be well established, the party members will get a choice between the one who's offering the ideological utopia or the one who says, no, we need to be pragmatic. Which one are Tory members going to choose? They'll choose the one they always choose. And to be fair, this is not me having a pop at Conservative Party members. Labour Party members have done the same. The only reason we have now gone for a pragmatic leader is because we were sick of being in opposition for so long. But the Conservatives, after the next election, will have just left power. So they will still think they can come straight back. So I just think that the Conservatives have a very, very, very low chance of picking a suitable leader at after the next election. So I think I think it's certain that even if Tory MPs try to get behind a pragmatic candidate, they won't win. The party membership will always choose. So their only chance is to try and unite behind what's called a compromise candidate, but the far right won't let them. People keep talking about Anne Widdecombe. I've clearly missed the start of this thing here. Pragmatic equals connected to multi-billion-pound portfolios. Oh, yeah, of course. We're not saying good. We're not saying that Rishi Sunak or even Theresa May were interested in governing this in the interests of people. They're still Conservative leaders, but they were pragmatic in that they wanted to win elections. That's what I mean by pragmatic. Wants to win elections. Will do what's necessary to win elections. Now, in Theresa May's case, of course, it turned out she was truly awful as a campaigner, so that didn't work out too well. In Rishi Sunak's case, he's also shown himself to be not great as campaigner, but also he's completely trapped by the far right of his party, as arguably Theresa May was to an extent. So they don't like, for example, Suella Braverman yesterday. I expected her to give a speech where she was sort of attacking the government's direction of travel and policy, which she did. I didn't expect her to seek to specifically undermine Rishi Sunak, but she did that as well. So she's a very loose cannon at the moment. And Rishi Sunak, if he were a strong leader, would need to say that she needs to either wind her neck in or be sacked. But he won't do that because he can't. Or he doesn't feel that he can, because she's obviously going to cause too much trouble on the backbenchers. But there we go. There's a lot of talk about Anne Widdecombe being pushed into the channel. I'm not really sure what that's about. Is that to use her as a raft? Personally, it's baffling to me that after electing Lettuce Liz, the Tory party membership still dare bleat about their democratic vote being denied when Sunak was coronated as leader, or crowned as leader. I don't like the word coronated. But anyway, but this is the thing, though. Like, people always say this, oh, he's the unelected. All prime ministers are unelected. You don't elect prime ministers. And I know what people mean. They mean when people go to the polls in a general election, they have a prime minister in mind. That's not who you're actually voting for. In fact, in my lifetime, let's go through it. I'm 47 now, right? So I've gone through a few prime ministers, right? Actually, even a pre-teen's gone through a few prime ministers, let's face it. But I've gone through a few prime ministers. Let us have a look at the scene. So the prime minister, when I've been around prime ministers, right? The first change of prime minister when I was alive was Harold Macmillan. Was that at a general election? No, it wasn't. So that's one who technically wasn't elected, the people had no say. Then it was Margaret Thatcher, okay, general election. Then it was John Major, not general election. Then it was Tony Blair, general election. Then it was Gordon Brown, not at an election. Then it was David Cameron at an election. Then it was Theresa May, not at an election. Then it was Boris Johnson, not at an election. Then I'm going to have to put these things aside. We've got three, by the way. Then it was Liz Truss, not at an election. Then it was Rishi Sunak, not at an election. 10 prime ministers who have become prime minister while I've been alive, 70% of them have done so outside of a general election. That's 70% of all new prime ministers in my lifetime have been made prime minister by Parliament, nothing to do with the people. So the idea of Rishi Sunak or anyone else not being elected prime minister, they're not elected. And like, in theory, like, even when, so in theory, when Labour win the next election, Keir Starmer's going to be prime minister. In theory, Labour could say, well, thanks for winning. We don't want you as prime minister anymore. We want someone else. They could do that. Parliament could do that. No problem. They can have whoever they want as prime minister. That is the constitutional thing of it. Right. One angry pagan, the born-again Bevanite, keeps talking about Big Madge. He said he laid down a gauntlet last night. I know you said that comment, but I don't know what it means, I'm afraid. I didn't watch it. Was surprised that Mogg's speech was reported on the BBC. No, I'll just come to this comment first. It's Harold Macmillan was my first PM. No, he wasn't my first PM. You said surely Wilson. Yes. Wilson was prime minister when I was born, but he became prime minister before I was born. I'm talking about people becoming prime minister. So Macmillan was the first person who became prime minister while I was on this earth. But in terms of Mogg's speech reported on the BBC, I haven't seen what they have reported. I mean, if we're going to be talking about surprises of the BBC reporting things that might be uncomfortable for the Conservatives, their big headline news this morning on the website was a Tory donor who the BBC had tried to report on him for the last year and a half for very dodgy financial dealings, like, illegal dealings, really, although they have made clear it's not his British business interests that have been that were illegal, but certainly previous dealings have been involved in basically was it a money laundering scam or something very dodgy. And it was I said sorry, did I say Macmillan? I meant Callaghan. Sorry, not Macmillan. Opposite. Sorry, Callaghan. what do you call it? Oh, you remember, I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah. So the BBC are actually reporting on something that should be very uncomfortable for the Conservatives, because the court has now ruled that the BBC can name the person that has previously been granted anonymity because they are a person of interest in a really serious financial bit of dodginess. So there we go. He challenged my assessment of Labour's moves last week around repealing public order acts. Okay, he didn't talk to me about that, so I don't know about that. It doesn't matter. I'm right, so we can soon find out when I am right as well. Let's see now. Oh, sorry, I've lost a thing. So yeah, let's have a look at some more comments on this. Welcome Revolution saying, I'm praying for Mad Nads to make a comeback to the Commons after Labour abolished the Lords. Should be my top pick for Tory leader. The thing is, so when you think about some of the biggest mouthpieces in the Tory party, right, representing the right of the party, who might appeal to some party members, Nadine Dorries, even Suella Braverman, right, David Frost, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Priti Patel. None of these people are popular with Tory MPs. Now, one thing we may have to talk about is the fact that when the election is held after the next year, roughly half of all current Tory MPs are going to lose their seats, right? It might be over half. In fact, at the moment, you would think over half. But we'll say about half of them are going to lose their seats, just to be, to pick a topical word, conservative. So we don't really know what the balance of power is going to be like. But what I would say is the craziest MPs tend to be in the safest seats. And that is because crazy MPs generally cannot win marginal constituencies. And because it's the marginal constituencies that are going to be lost, the Conservatives are actually going to lose quite a lot of good, sort of what you might call good MPs, MPs who are hardworking, effective, communicate well with their public. Because how do you win a marginal constituency? By doing all those things, by being a very good local campaigner, by demonstrating to swing voters in your local constituency that you have their backs. So they're overnight going to lose a load of effective MPs, okay? So that leaves them with a higher proportion of the crazies. So it might well be that after this time, one of those people, well, not Nadine Dorries, because she's definitely leaving Parliament, but one of these other people, and Jacob Rees-Mogg's probably gone. Actually, let's have a think. Suella Braverman she is actually going to be an MP. She has wangled herself a very safe seat. Technically, it's a gerrymandered version of her old seat, but she is going to win. Jacob Rees-Mogg is doubtful. He may do, but it's doubtful. Lee Anderson's seat's gone, but he would never be made Tory leader anyway. In fact, Lee Anderson went a bit quiet, people noticed on Twitter, didn't he, recently? And people were wondering, is it because Conservative HQ have told him to dial it down a bit? Because he was actually... Because I'll tell you what's happened. As a result of these local elections, what's happened is the Conservatives, if they didn't know it before, have seen that their culture wars are not really cutting through. They are appealing to people who aren't going to vote Labour. That's the problem. The election is always ultimately, 32 million people vote, okay. But ultimately, it's down to the few 100,000 people who are choosing between Labour and the Conservatives in a certain number of seats, a minority of the seats in marginal constituencies. So really, the Conservatives need to be hitting the issues that are important to those people who are deciding between Labour and the Conservatives in those areas. And the culture wars are not doing that. So the Conservatives seem to be coming to that view that maybe Lee Anderson and Suella Braverman are not electoral assets for them. Although I noticed Lee Anderson piped up again, was it yesterday, on the talk of Labour giving voting rights to people who actually live and pay taxes in the country. But there we go. But Lee Anderson is definitely not an MP after the next election. But I have said before, if he was shrewd, and he might be shrewd, if he was shrewd, he loses his seat, right? Okay, all part of the plan. He's got a job at GB News, so he works in London. Okay, so he moves closer. He moves to a nice, say, he finds somewhere nearer London, south of England, southeast of England, that's lost some seats. So he finds some Conservative seats that have been lost, but they were lost narrowly, so they'll probably flip back at the next election. So he goes there, gets himself made the candidate for one of those, what is now a Liberal Democrat or Labour seat, and then wins the next election. So he does have a route back to Parliament if he can leverage his current popularity within the Tory party, because there will be lots of other people who will want those seats. There will be competition for them, but if he's shrewd, he might be able to wangle himself one. But for now, he is definitely not going to be an MP come the next election. Now, it might be that he just tries to forge his career in the media. But the problem with, again, this goes back to David Frost, why David Frost wants to be an MP, because it will guarantee he can maintain his relevance. Lee Anderson, by losing his seat in Parliament, risks that relevance. So it might be that he's got a job at GB News for now, but there's a couple of threats there. First, if it doesn't seem he's as relevant because he's no longer an MP, then he may lose that job. But also GB News is struggling with cash flow. They're not a profitable organization. They've recently been crowing about viewing figures. I've not seen the viewing figures. Maybe they're true, maybe they're not. But they're not making money. They're losing money. So it may be that GB News falls by the wayside anyway. But there it is. It's the most important reason why there can't be democracy without PR. So proportional representation obviously means that people can vote, or they're more likely to vote for a candidate or party that they would like to. So it is much more democratic indeed. Whereas what we're asking people to do, really, I would say the next election, but it's in every general election, we're essentially asking people to vote for the candidate who is most likely to defeat the Conservative candidate. And that's not particularly democratic, because what that does is it's telling people that they need to have the mindset of a two-party system when we are not a two-party system. Like in America, they are really a two-party system. So first past the post, although it still doesn't, it's not very democratic, because you can have presidents win without actually winning the popular vote. But it doesn't seem as bad in some ways, because they are realistically a two-party system. Other parties tend to merge with one or the other. Whereas in this country, we're clearly not a two-party system. But the way you vote in a general election, if you do not vote with the mindset of a two-party system, then what you are actually doing is risking your worst case scenario winning, which is often what happens, because most people's worst case scenario is a Conservative government. So yes, PR would make the situation much more democratic. There will always be arguments, there'll always be failures. There's no perfect system. There are different systems of PR, for example, and the one I favor may not be the one that others favor. In fact, there are electoral reform groups who favor systems that I don't favor, that I don't like. But yes, it would make it much more democratic. And you can tell how afraid the Tories are of it, because the Tories are, even though they're having their loony conventions this week, they're also having two meltdowns. The first meltdown is the possibility of a Labour Lib Dem coalition. Now, in reality, this is not going to happen, but the fact that they think it might, and because what are they worried about? That this would bring forward proportional representation, something which, by the way, I think we might see anyway, but it would certainly make it more likely, should we put it that way. They're scared witless about that. The second thing they're melting down about is, as I say, Labour allowing people to vote who've lived and paid taxes here for years. People, EU citizens, for example, who have settled status. That concerns them. because it's a bit funny, isn't it? Because you'd surely think that's isn't that global Britain leading the way? Because wasn't that what Brexit was about? So that Britain can lead the way, we can do things our own way. So Keir Starmer says, well, let's give non-UK citizens who are settled in the UK and pay their taxes the right to vote. That's leading the way. No, we mustn't lead the way like that. But there it is. Anyway, last couple of comments because we need to stop now. PR's the way to go, but I expect the Tories to stir things up by throwing the question of which PR. Oh, the Tories and the Tory media will fight tooth and nail for it. So people who are arguing for, say, Labour to get behind it, like now it's like it. I mean, if you're going to get behind it at the last minute. The Tory press, there will be lots of money. Put it this way, it is not PR. It's not just that it's not in the interest of the Conservative Party. Remember, the Conservative Party is the party of the billionaire. It's not in the interest of the billionaires. Billionaires don't mind spending. I mean, they can spend tens of millions collectively on a campaign to get what they want, and that is worth it for them. The fear that will be pumped in, because at the moment, look, they're melting down just at the outside chance that PR might come into play in the next 10 years, and they're having a complete meltdown, right? Imagine what would happen if the party most likely to win the next election said that it was back in proportional representation. Imagine the meltdown. Imagine that. But anyway, thanks for coming on there. We'll call it there. Don't forget to click the like button and comment below as well. Subscribe. And if you'd like to join the Patreon for the channel, then that will be in the description below. But thanks for coming on, everyone. And until next time, I'll see you later.